Good morning. I am 5 minutes earlier today, so it's the usual. If you're watching and recording, you're welcome to fast forward or stay with us through our hellos. Good morning, Mike. Good morning, Sandra. Good morning, Anne. All right, it is time for us to start. Today, let's talk about empathy. This is a very interesting topic and even somewhat controversial nowadays, as there is a lot of material out there on what it means to be an empath. So let's try to detangle this concept together. Well, at least start to, because obviously the subject is so vast that we cannot possibly go into a lot of depth on it in the framework of our mindful morning reflections. Brené Brown defines empathy as an emotional skill set that allows us to understand what someone is experiencing and to reflect back that understanding. Most researchers agree that there are at least two elements to empathy: cognitive empathy and affective empathy. Cognitive empathy, sometimes called also perspective taking or mentalizing, is the ability to recognize and understand another person's emotions. Affective empathy, that is often called experience sharing, is one's own emotional attunement with another person's experience. In simple terms, cognitive empathy is understanding what someone is feeling and not necessarily feeling it for them. If someone is feeling lonely, empathy doesn't require us to feel lonely too, only to reach back into our own experience with loneliness so that we can understand the person and connect. Brené Brown says affective empathy, which is feeling something along with a person who is struggling, is a slippery slope towards becoming overwhelmed and not being able to offer meaningful support. Empathy is a tool of compassion. We can respond empathically only if we are willing to be present to someone's pain. If we're not willing to do that, it's not really empathy. Based on her work, Brené Brown believes that any meaningful connection requires a combination of compassion and cognitive empathy, which is seeing things from another person's perspective. And there are many models and theories on empathy, but in her book Atlas of the Heart, Brené Brown talks about 5 attributes, and the first 4 are based on the research of Teresa Wiseman, and the 5th comes from Kristin Neff's work on self-compassion. So these are the 5 attributes she talks about. First one is perspective taking. So when somebody is sharing their experience with you, ask yourself, what does this mean for me? What is this experience like for me? The second attribute is staying out of judgment. In other words, just listen. Don't put value on it. The third attribute is recognizing emotion. So this is about touching within myself something that helps me identify and connect with what the other person might be feeling. We constantly need to check in and clarify what we're hearing, to ask questions. The fourth attribute is communicating our understanding about the emotion. So sometimes this can be elaborate and detailed, and sometimes we can simply say to the person, shit, that's hard, I get that. And finally, the fifth attribute is practicing mindfulness, which means not pushing emotions away because they are uncomfortable, but feeling them, moving through them. Turns out that the near enemy of empathy is sympathy. The relationship between the two is the same as in compassion versus pity. So rather than being a tool of connection, sympathy removes us from the person. When someone says, I feel sorry for you, they're standing at a safe distance. Rather than conveying this powerful me too message of empathy, it communicates not me, and then adds, but I do feel sorry for you. Sympathy can even be a trigger for shame. So for example, researchers found that cancer patients on the receiving end of sympathy describe it as an unwanted, superficial, pity-based response that, however well-intended, is focused on the observer's discomfort rather than on alleviating the patient's distress. Interesting, huh? So sympathy and pity are first cousins, so to speak. They are the emotions of, well, we feel bad for you, from way over here, where the kind of misery you're experiencing doesn't happen, never affects me. And this is one of the reasons why we need to dispel the myth that empathy is walking in someone else's shoes. Rather than walking in your shoes, I actually need to just learn how to listen to the story you tell about what it is like in your shoes, and to believe you even when it doesn't match my own experiences. The minute I try to put myself in your place rather than try to understand the situation from your perspective, our empathic connection unravels. And either I get sucked into the vortex of my own emotional difficulties, or because my experience doesn't match yours, I start doubting what you're telling me. In other words, we need to learn to hear the story instead of trying to insert ourselves into the story. To be empathetic, we need to connect to our own experiences in a thinking way that creates emotional resonance. Like, oh yeah, I know that feeling. I am not going to fall into it right now, but I know it, and I can communicate with you in a way that makes you know that you're not alone. Now that is truly empathetic. This is a truly compassionate response. So let's explore this a little bit together through a short practice of mindful inquiry around what it means for you to be empathetic. Take a comfortable position. As always, take a few moments to settle in, acknowledging whatever it is that's happening for you today, physically, emotionally, mentally. Breathe in a free way that is not controlled. See if you can simply observe how your breath flows in and out of your body, how your body moves with your breath. And now bring to mind a friend who is currently suffering. And the suffering can be emotional or physical in nature. Whatever it is, imagine your friend sharing their story with you. Let's examine if your response is truly empathetic or just a disguise for empathy, whereas in reality it actually creates distance between you and this person who is suffering. And as always, be open and honest in this process. It may feel really uncomfortable and maybe even disappointing to find out that your good intentions may be not that life-affirming for the other person after all. But when you give yourself the freedom to discover and acknowledge that without judgment, it will open up the space for true compassion, true empathy, without any subtexts. So once again, imagine your friend sharing their story of suffering with you. What are they telling you? And notice what is your immediate reaction to the story. And let me go through a few scenarios here and see if any of them resonate with you. So scenario number 1, sympathy versus empathy response. So your friend is telling you the story and you sympathize rather than emphasize. You say, oh, you poor thing, bless your heart, versus, I get it. I've been there. And the subtext of this sympathetic response is distance. These things don't happen to me or people like me. So if you discover if this is your response, sympathy versus empathy, don't judge yourself. It's okay. Your intention to examine a more skillful way of being with another human being is enough. The second scenario is judgment response. So your friend shares their story with you and you feel shame for them. You gasp and confirm how horrifying this experience must have been. If you do that, in effect, what you are communicating is that this person should feel ashamed for experiencing this or that. Again, if this is your response, No worries. Examine it openly and honestly. The third type of response is disappointment response. So you may have considered this friend to be the pillar of worthiness and a role model. And now that they've shared the story with you, you realize that they're simply human. And that may be disappointing. Yet another scenario is blame response. So once again, your friend shares their story with you and you feel really uncomfortable for them. So to discharge your own discomfort, you need to find someone to blame. It may be your friend themselves. So you say, what were you thinking when you did this or that or said this or that? Or you may try to look for someone else to take the fall. Who was that guy? Let's kick his butt. Again, if this is the response you usually go to, or in this particular situation, don't worry, examine it honestly. Scenario number 5 is minimize and avoid response. We minimize and avoid when we want hard feelings to go away quickly. In effect, you're basically refusing to acknowledge your friend's pain because it makes you uncomfortable. So you say, nah, you're exaggerating. It couldn't have been that bad. You are awesome. You're perfect. And everybody loves you. So there is no issue. Again, this is not empathy. Another scenario is competing response. So when your friend shares the story of their pain with you, you confuse the opportunity to connect with a chance to one-up them. So you might say something like, that's nothing. Listen to what happened to me one time. Again, you're thinking that you're helping, you're empathizing, but is it really so? And finally, a very ubiquitous, probably the most common scenarios is problem-solving response. So when you see your friend in pain, your first instinct may be to fix it ASAP. And it becomes especially hard when you are somebody who people seek advice from. So there's a very fine line between helping your friend find their solution and jumping in with your expert opinion. Again, it's not being with somebody in their pain. It's removing yourself from their pain, even though you think you're being empathetic. So I hope that you discovered something interesting about yourself through this process. And again, try not to judge yourself for whatever transpired. Remind yourself that you're human and what matters is your continuous intention to open up space for skillful communication with people and for compassionate action. So to complete our practice today, let's send the energy of loving kindness towards ourselves to reaffirm that, to reaffirm our intention for compassionate action and true empathy. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well in body and mind. May I be happy, healthy, and free. May I feel protected, cared for, at ease. May I find deep, natural peace. As you go through your day-to-day, I invite you to notice what your responses are when you think it is empathy. Is it truly empathy, or is it one of those disguised scenarios? Maybe it's sympathy or covered judgment, disappointment, minimizing, comparing, problem solving. And again, whatever you find out, remind yourself that your intention matters, and send loving kindness to both yourself and this person who is suffering. Thank you so much for being here today. Enjoy your day. And I will see you on Thursday, because tomorrow is Amethyst's group healing. Enjoy that. Bye.